collect food for the Hollywood Food Coalition. People come from all over the neighborhood, and they bring a minimum of 10 bags of sandwiches and muesli bars and drinks and fruit, sometimes nuts, sometimes hygiene products. Depends on what people can give and want to give. You just think about somebody who's hungry, living under a bridge somewhere, and if you would give them a bag of sustenance, what would you put in it? The lady came today with 40 bags.
And some people just one bag. It depends what they can do.
And that's Hazel.
All is welcome.
This is a story that started 65 million years ago. A movie by Steven Spielberg, Jurassic Park. Once upon a time in America, there was a little Aussie boy that arrived in LA and said, "I got a good voice." They didn't give him a chance. Eventually, a man at a party met this guy and said, "You know, you got a great voice." I'd say, "Well, you got a great voice."
I was born on the 18th of June, 1942, which just happens to be the same day that Paul McCartney was born in England. So I look upon him as an astrological twin. He got all the money, I got all the talent. No, wait a minute, that's the wrong way round. He got all the talent, I got all the money. No, wait a minute, I didn't get either. I'm a comic actor. My mother and father were very popular, and as a child being born to a very highly successful theatrical couple, it's rather awkward because they're at work night and day. They're doing radio, television shows, and I was just this little baby kid, virtually being born backstage. I wasn't born backstage, but I was brought up in the theater. My grandmother would come and help look after me because my mother didn't have the time. I had a very difficult childhood. My mother and father's relationship became incredibly tempestuous because he drank a lot and he was a real fun drunk. But that's not a great life for a kid. My life was very awkward as a young child, great celebrity at nighttime, parties and so forth. I spent a lot of my time falling asleep under tables in the middle of parties because they didn't want to go home. It was always party time at the Tate's house. Tiggy likes to get on camera, so she'll be bobbing in and out all the way through the interview. I do miss Australia very much. I live here in LA and everybody thinks that this is the greatest place on the planet, but actually I have a secret. Australia's better. I went through school with my parents fighting every day, and eventually there was a pretty nasty divorce. And when I talked to my minister who wanted to confirm me at the age of 14 or 15, I had just lost one of my favorite friends. My dog had just been killed by a car, and I was very upset, and I was at a final confirmation class for the Christian faith. And I was upset, and he said to me, "What's wrong with you, Nick? You're not participating very well today." And I said, "Well, my doggy died today." And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I said, "Well, do dogs go to heaven?" And he said to me, "Well, no, don't be ridiculous, of course not." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "The only way entrance into the kingdom of heaven is by your free will, that you accept that Jesus Christ is the one and only true Son of God, and that gets you into heaven." And I said, but dogs don't talk and they don't think like that. He said, exactly, so they won't be in heaven. I said, well, what about all the Chinese people that have got their own religions? And what about the Muslim people? And what about the Jewish people? And he said, they won't be in heaven. Then I don't want to be in heaven either. He was furious with me. And I said, I'm doing the wrong thing, and I left. I was not confirmed. And I had no religion. I thought, I'm fine with that. If they're all in their exclusive club over there, all being happy Christians together and denying that all the rest of the world has got other faiths, and because it just seemed to me to be so wrong. There were so many nice people that I met who weren't Christian, and I couldn't see why they wouldn't be accepted. So I didn't have a religion from the age of 14, 15, right up until I was, well, right up until I was nearly 60. Hi, this is Tiggy, my dog. She's a golden doodle, and I am Nick Tate. Yeah, I say it with some kind of clarity because I'm an actor, and I'm taught to project. I've done a lot of voiceover work in my life. In fact, I've been rather successful with the voiceovers, so much so that I was able to build this house for my wife, Hazel, who you will meet. Hazel is a wonderful human being, and I'm very fortunate. She's my partner in life and has been for 45 years.
My name is Hazel Butterfield Tate. I grew up in London. I was born in 1953, so that's shortly after the Second World War, which finished in 1945. And we lived still with some rationing, and I lived in an area that was very close to a railway line. And because that had been a very important link during the war, it had been very bombed. And so all around us, there were what they call bomb sites. And so I remember as a child, it's probably terribly dangerous, but like playing in these bomb sites, you know, where there were big holes and all the houses had fallen down. Probably wasn't very safe at all, but it was just part of my childhood and it was there. My family were regular churchgoers every Sunday. We did not have a car, and so we actually went to church twice on Sunday, and every time there was probably a 2-mile walk and then a couple of buses that we had to catch. But they belonged to a church that had broken away from the regular sort of Christian church, which I guess was Church of England. And why had it broken away? It had broken away because it had formed to await the return of Jesus Christ. There were groups all over in the mid-1800s who were awaiting the coming of the Lord. And so my family was actually in one of those groups of people. I shared an apartment in London with a lovely girl, Marilyn, and her cousin was a great friend of Nick's, and so we told him that he needed to bring some young men to to meet all these lovely girls in the apartment, and one day he brought Nick. And there you go, 2 years later we got married. I've got a photograph inside of the day we got married. We've been around each other a long time.
I had become a reasonably successful actor in Australia in the 1970s. I was asked to do a television production called Too Many People Are Disappearing. In the show, I had the pleasure of working with an actress called Ilona Rogers. She played my wife. I loved her as a person. I found her to be incredibly intelligent and very worldly. My wife had to fly back to England almost the day I started the film with Ilona. Her father was very, very ill, my wife's father, and so she went home to help her mother care for him, and he sadly died during the time that she was there.
Yeah, that was sad. That was sad time. You know, you're torn. You're torn. It's hard when you're far away from your family.
And so she was gone for about 4 months whilst I filmed this movie of the week with Alona. And Alona had a little 2.5-year-old son, and Hazel and I had a little 2.5-year-old son.
She was working on the show, but she had a nanny, and so she said, look, don't worry, Nick. You know, you can bring Tommy over here and he can be looked after.
I said to Alona, there's a quality about you that I don't understand why I feel this way, but I feel like you're my sister.
She said, you know what it is? It's spiritual. It's a spiritual love. You're loving with a spiritual love. And she said, and I'm a Baha'i. And he said, you're what?
I said, what, that temple that's up in the hills here in Sydney? And she said, yes. Do you know about it? And I said, well, I live in Mona Vale and in Sydney, and the temple's in Mona Vale. And I remember as a child watching it being built on the hill, which is on the next hill from where we live. She talked, first of all, about the universality of mankind, about believing that all people are equal, and that religion should not be exclusive. And I said, well, I believe that. And she said, and that all people are equal in the world. Doesn't matter whether you're white, or pink, or yellow, or brown, or black, or whatever. And I said, well, I've long held that belief that we're all the same. And she said, I think you're Baha'i. I said, what do you mean you think I'm Baha'i? I don't have a religion. She said, well, I think you don't know that you're a Baha'i, and you really are. It was kind of a scary thought to think that somebody knew things about me that I didn't know about me.
I finally got back from London, and Nick said, I've got a friend I want to introduce you to. She's, I've been working with her, and he had told me about her on the phone, but he wanted to introduce me to Alona. And he did, and she and I became firm friends. And I remember going to her apartment one day, and you know, I thought she was my special friend, and I walked in, and then she had this room full of all these people, and they were all like different nationalities. I'm like, well, who are all these people? And of course she was having a Baha'i gathering. That was a Baha'i gathering, but that was new to me. So she taught me a lot about the Baha'i faith. And then I started going to firesides, and actually I loved the firesides, and I loved the diversity, and I got to love the diversity. Plus they served cheesecake, and I thought, if Baha'is have cheesecake at their gatherings, I'm going back. My passion for 40-something odd years has been repurposing of textiles, global textiles. I've been lucky enough to travel a lot, and I have a passion for textiles, especially indigenous textiles, and I create using those. And they can be fragments, they can be the tiniest piece. Nothing is ever wasted. I just love to hand stitch. I find it a very peaceful thing to do. And then I'll just do this hand stitching, which I love. They call it slow stitching, and it's in the different cultures. The Japanese do it. I think they call it boro in Japanese. And I loved going to garage sales and markets, and Alona had always say, I'd love to come with you on Sunday, but I've got to be back by 10:30 or whatever the time was. And I was like, oh, well, she's got to be back by 10:30. She had to be back by 10:30 because we lived 5 minutes from the Sydney House of Worship. So the House of Worship is very visible up there on the hillside. And I said, could you take me up there? I'd not been up there. I didn't know anything about it except that she always went on a Sunday. And she took me up to the service, and it had just finished, and there were people walking out of the House of Worship, And we walked in, and as I walked through the door, tears welled, so moved. It was the atmosphere with all the prayers that had just been offered and all the people in there for one purpose of unity. So we're nearly finished with this little cuff. I'm just going to do a more decorative stitch down the middle of this.
Then I met a Baha'i who I actually knew very well, and he'd never told me he was Baha'i. He was a fellow actor who I had helped a great deal when he first came from England to Australia. His name was Philip Hinton, and it was sad to mention his name just now because Philip died very recently. And so when I met Alona, I found the Baha'i faith. To become a Baha'i was rather like accepting that you're going to be a priest in a religion, and because we don't have priests. So all Baha'is are teachers of our own faith. And we have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And that was all too scary to me. I liked playing up, I liked drinking, I liked going to parties, I liked all sorts of things that as a good Baha'i, one should perhaps not necessarily do. But in life, there are all sorts of things that we shouldn't necessarily do, and most religions forbid us from doing them. And the Baha'i faith is no different to that, except the Baha'i faith doesn't forbid anything. It just advises that it's perhaps not a good way to go.
One day, I just woke up and knew, and I cooked a very special dinner for the family. Just the four of us. And at that dinner, I just said to them, I've got something to tell you today. And I had a decoration card. And I said, today I'm going to become a Baha'i.
I was happy with that. In fact, I feel very proud of her. And for 12 years I hung out. I said, I love being a friend of the Baha'i faith.
I said I'm driving to some friends of ours who lived about 25, 35 minutes away, Philip and Ann Hinton. I drove and they opened the door and I was just standing there in the dark, and they just put their arms out to me. They knew. Isn't that lovely?
My father had a voice apparently exactly like mine. So much so that when I started doing voiceovers, and a lot of the voiceovers that I was doing were in commercials, and I would hear my father's voice, so I might be walking through the room, and suddenly I would get this frisson on the back of my hair here. It's my father. And then I realized that it was a commercial with me speaking in it. So Hazel became a Baha'i, and we started having functions in our house. Life was good as an actor in America, and there was lots of chances for me to expand. And I remember Casey Porter, who's a wonderful Baha'i here, that lives in LA, he held a big party in Nowruz. Now that's the new year for the Baha'is. And it starts, I think, the 21st of March. So I went to Casey Porter's Nowruz party, and Maury Willis, who was about 90, came into the room and he was eating it because they've just been through this long fast, and this is the first time they sit down to have dinner. And Maury came into the room where I was eating, and he said, "Oh, it gets harder for me every day." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Well, don't you find that?" And I said, "Well, maybe it's because I'm not a Baha'i." And he said, "What?" I said, "I'm not a Baha'i, Maury." "What do you mean you're not a Baha'i? You come to my Friday night firesides? You've been coming for years. Are you an imposter?" I said, I'm a friend of the Baha'is. You're false. This is a falsehood. You're sitting on the fence. He started attacking me. I started to laugh. I said, "Are you kidding me?" And he said, "I'm not kidding you. You're sitting on the fence. Why are you doing that? You're coming and eating my food and you're being with my friends." And Loie Willows, his wife, a dear darling woman, she came in and she grabbed hold of him. It was like a dog, and she said, "Leave him alone, leave him alone." And he said, "No, he's pretending he's a Baha'i, not a pretend." So anyway, it was comical to me. It wasn't comical to him. He was really angry about it. So I went home with my wife, dear Hazel, that night.
He was restless. It was very early in the morning and he was rather restless. And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Oh, nothing, nothing." He said, "Go back to sleep."
It was about 4:30 in the morning, and I felt we were having an earthquake because the bed was shaking. I was trying to meditate because I felt really weird. Hazel said, "Well, do you want to talk?" And I said, "No, I don't want to talk." I was just sitting there, but I could feel this, and I said, I felt like there was an earthquake. And the fact that Hazel wanted to question me about all of this, I said, "Just go back to sleep." And she said, "Oh, well, if you can't say anything nice, I'll roll over and go to sleep." So she rolled over, and it just suddenly dawned on me. I said, "I'm a Baha'i. Is that nice enough?" That's how I became a Baha'i.
You know, some people spend their lives seeking for something they know not what. I didn't seek. I didn't know I needed or wanted. My wife did, and I saw it in her, and it woke me in my sleep and said, "I want you." And I had no argument. Because I had been around so many Baha'is and fallen in love with the concept, though I didn't think I wanted it, I was very happy to embrace it.
I'm trying to be a Baha'i, but I'm not an example. End of story.